All praises to the Most High Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Raha Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in His truth in all sincerity. Matthew 12:25. And Yahweh Shai knew their thoughts, and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand.
Have you activated the National Guard? I know that the Sheriff has requested for additional assistance. Can you tell us whether they're going to be playing a role in keeping?
Yes, the answer is yes, we have, as we said last week, and we staged those troops. I'll have General Menke talk about where they're at, and again, use this as an opportunity to stress to Minnesotans the frustration you have, and as you saw this, they killed a man, created chaos, pushed down protesters, threw gas indiscriminately, and then left the scene, and then we're left to clean up. I understand the anger. I understand trying to parse who were the law enforcement on the scene when you got there after a man was killed is difficult for folks who are out there. But I can't stress enough, our goal, and I'll have General Menke talk about what the role of these Guard troops are in conjunction with incredible work from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, from mutual aid across, and of course the State Patrol, of trying to get to the point where what we're saying is we can handle this and Minnesotans can express their First Amendment rights and have our folks on the streets and get these people out of here. And so, John, if you want to talk a little bit, but the answer is yes, there's activated. He can talk to you about numbers.
To be clear, that they're activated different than having them staged.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's the National Guard doing right now? So we have, we have been on state active duty for over a week. So we've had soldiers prepared in the metro area to respond in a much rapid manner than if they were not mobilized. So we have a request from the Hennepin County Sheriff to support them, and that is to help them free up additional resources for other work that they need to do. And we have started coordinating with them this morning on that, and that first area of support will be assisting them with their requirement to provide security to the Whipple building. So we'll be helping them there. And then we are in parallel planning with other organizations within the state of Minnesota, to include the State Patrol, the Minnesota DNR, and other local agencies to render assistance if requested.
Did you say how?
So that was a video there with Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, former vice presidential candidate, and he's now activated the Minnesota National Guard as a response to another individual being shot by an ICE agent. Me personally, I don't really think that's going to carry much weight. All Nero would have to do at this point is to invoke the Insurrection Act, and those National Guardsmen that Tim Walz activates, they would fall under federal command if Trump was to invoke the Insurrection Act. And I had to fact check myself on that. I didn't want to put out any false information. So what happens to the activated National Guardsmen if the president invokes the Insurrection Act? When the president invokes the Insurrection Act, activated National Guardsmen are federalized, shifting from state command under their governor to direct federal control under the president. This action temporarily lifts restrictions that typically prohibit federal troops from engaging in domestic law enforcement. Here is a detailed breakdown of what happens to National Guardsmen. Change in command. Guardsmen shift from Title 32 status, state controlled, to federally funded, to Title 10 status, federal active duty. The governor no longer controls these troops. They answer to the president, usually through the Secretary of Defense. So this here is just a lot of, political posturing. This is Tim Walz trying to make it look like he's in control of the situation in Minnesota. And say what you want to say about Nero here, but he's far ahead of Tim Walz. And if you actually, you're playing a game of chess and Nero's clearly beating Tim Waltz. If you understand the game of chess, and, Trump understands this. He understands the moment this guy activates his National Guardsmen as a hindrance to my ICE agents, all I have to do is invoke the Insurrection Act, and those guardsmen fall underneath Trump's control. So, you may have a few Minnesota guardsmen who probably politically lean to the left, and they may refuse to serve or fulfill their contract, underneath Trump if Trump was to invoke the Insurrection Act. But personally, I don't think that would be a large number. Roughly 47% of Minnesota, they did vote for Nero. So that's almost half, so civil war is coming to Babylon, but I don't see the civil war being between various agencies. Like I'm not seeing, National Guard versus ICE, large groups of these two shooting at each other, or, ICE versus the Marines. That's not happening, or any law enforcement, NYPD or LAPD versus ICE. That's not happening. It's probably more going to be, whatever civil war and bloodshed comes out of this, it'll probably be between those agencies versus whoever is considered a hostile foreign, entity here, along with their liberal sympathizers, so with all the, tens of millions of so-called illegals here, there have been, reports of sleeper cells being set up all over this country. So, between sleeper cells, between possible, UN peacekeepers that are here, whoever else is here amongst the civilian base in this particular country, that's where your civil war is going to take place. It's going to be those sleeper cells, those particular, like I said, whoever they would consider a foreign hostile entity here, along with their sympathizers, so once they start going through your personal data, they start looking at whatever videos you've made or whatever opinion you've put online. If you're saying something that sounds like it's against the U.S. government, or you're saying something that sounds like it's against particular politicians, per se, you would be considered a hostile entity here, along with whatever so-called migrant or immigrant is here, that they're trying to deport. You would be considered a sympathizer, and I think a lot of these so-called liberals, the white woman, the moles on both sides, whether they're black or white, because these are primarily the main people that's out there protesting and causing ruckus out there. It's these crazy far left wing liberals, and a lot of them are being paid. This is people like George Soros, people that's not even in the country, like these multi-billionaires who just want to see the country fall. They just want to see Babylon burn. And, they're funding a lot of this stuff here. A few years back, Obama has deported more immigrants than any president in history. And there was no, protesting and all that type of stuff while ICE was doing that. But right now you have Nero in office, and you have something, a lot of people, are being accused of having Trump derangement syndrome. So they're just out there, causing all types of ruckuses. They're getting in the middle of ICE, trying to deport people, trying to apprehend people for deportation. And, they're getting themselves shot. They're getting themselves killed in the process of doing that. Now, I'm not going to say who's right or wrong, or even where I stand on it. Really, I stand on the side of the Most High, Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, and biblical prophecy. And right now, biblical prophecy tells us that this place is headed towards civil war. This place is headed towards ultimate collapse. So let's look at 2 Esdras 15 and 16 with that being said. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes. and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Once again, that was 2nd Esdras 15 and 16. I'll read that one more time. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. And, the rhetoric is turning up. More people are being vocal about their disdain for Nero and his tactics. And that's basically, what this whole thing is about here. Trump is the cruel lord here. He's the one that's going to, it's either my way or the highway. This is how we're going to do it. I don't care who really doesn't like my tactics or how I go about things. I'm doing what I feel is best. Not only that, but he's feeding his humongous ego along with it. Trump is that guy. He's already thinking they're going to build statues to me. They're going to put my face on Mount Rushmore. They're going to have paintings all over this country in my honor when I die. They may even put my face on a dollar bill or a coin or whatever cryptocurrency, digital currency they may have at that time. We know that we are moving into a cashless society. So however, Trump feels that they're going to honor him. He's looking at whatever legacy he can leave behind, that he's the president that made America great again. That's how he feels. This is about feeding his ego, but the second part of this video that I really actually wanted to touch on, I just had to go into that part first about the country actually heading towards a civil war. But Tim Walz trying to activate the National Guard, but he really has no power there. Like once again, Trump has all Trump has to do is invoke that Insurrection Act, and those activated members of the National Guard will fall under Trump's control. But what I actually wanted to talk about in this video was another thing showing you that how this nation is split is there's another shutdown looming. Today is the 24th. So this is Saturday, the 24th, and in exactly 1 week from now, if the appropriations bill is not passed, the government shutdown is going to happen again on January 31st. So I think they have until about 5 p.m., if I'm correct, on Friday, the 30th, to come up with a, resolution, or the government is once again shut down. So, let's take a look at some things here. This is off of Twitter from an individual by the name of Colin Rugg, at Colin Rugg. You can see his handle there if you'd like to follow, but here we are here. He posts, just in, odds of a U.S. government shutdown by January 31st spiked to 85% on Polymarket after Senator Chuck Schumer announced Democrats would not advance the appropriations bill if DHS, which is Department of Homeland Security, funding is included. What's happening in Minnesota is appalling and unacceptable in any city, Schumer said in a statement. So the individual who was shot today, which led Tim Walz to activating the National Guard, they're using that as basically as a bargaining chip here. Hey, ICE is out of control. We know that ICE falls underneath the Department of Homeland Security. So basically what Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are saying is, hey, ICE is out of control. If you pass this bill to try to give the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, an additional $10 billion this year, we're not passing it. We're voting no. We'll just shut down the government in 1 week, which would be next Saturday. The government would be shut down if by Friday afternoon or Friday evening they don't have a resolution. So I'll continue. What's happening in Minnesota is appalling and unacceptable in any American city, Schumer said in a statement. Democrats sought common sense reforms in the Department of Homeland Security spending bill, but because of Republicans' refusal to stand up to President Trump, the DHS bill is woefully inadequate to rein in the abuses of ICE. I will vote no. Senate Democrats will not provide the votes to proceed if the appropriations bill if the DHS funding bill is included. So we're seeing a whole lot of political posturing. These people knew that they were going to shut the government down anyway. Once again, the only reason why the government was reopened in early December was because they couldn't do this right before the holiday season. You got the holiday season. This is supposed to be a time where people out there spending as much money as possible. You got to shut down. You got a shutdown that's happening during holiday season. No, they're going to get the government back up and running. Whatever little bullshit temporary deals they can put into place, that's what they'll do. They'll have you go out there, spend all your money for these pagan holidays anyway, Christmas, New Year's, that type of stuff. And then bam, soon as all the holidays pass, at least the major ones, now we can shut this thing down again. So this is how they catch a lot of people slipping. They do it all the time. But you got to kind of be aware of what's happening in the games that they play here. This was no coincidence that somebody ended up shot and killed 1 week before now that they can use this so-called victim as a bargaining chip here to try to make the Republicans do whatever they want to do. But that's not happening. We know Nero is not going to bow down to these Democrats. Nero's not going to say, okay, cool, y'all win. I'm not going to give my ICE agents, I'm not going to give the Department of Homeland Security $10 billion. Nero is not going to say, hey, okay, you know what, you guys win. You can keep giving so-called illegal aliens however many billions of dollars in Medicare and Medicaid as you want every single year. Nero's not going for that shit. I'm just being honest. So, in my personal opinion, these Polymarket odds are correct. We are heading to another government shutdown in 1 week here. So I'll read an article that goes further in depth with this. This is off of... Oh, before we do that, I had this pulled up as well. What government agencies will be affected if the government is shut down on January 31st? I accidentally put 2016 there. So let's change that. I didn't realize I did that. All right, here we go. What government agencies will be affected if the government is shut down on January 31st, 2026? A government shutdown on January 31st, 2026 would primarily affect agencies lacking full year appropriations, likely including Homeland Security, Justice, Treasury, Interior, and Commerce. While essentially services like air traffic control, border security, and law enforcement continue, they face disruptions and unpaid staff. So the key affected agencies and services are Homeland Security and Border Patrol, which we know Trump will sit there and tariff every single country to death to make sure he's able to pay Homeland Security and border protection and his military. He'll do that. He's already done it last year with the last one. Screw everybody else as long as his troops are eating. He doesn't care what other federal agencies, hey, everybody else got to tough that out, basically. But Justice and Interior, there will be delays in legal proceedings and closure of national parks. Health and Human Services, FDA food safety inspections are delayed. WIC, Women, Infants, and Children program funding could face interruption. Labor and Environment, which is EPA, stops inspecting most hazardous waste sites. Department of Labor activities are curtailed. Housing and Commerce, FHA, stops insuring some new mortgages. HUD slows new loan processing. Research, non-essential research at NASA and other agencies halt. I'll stop there. We get the point. We're heading into another shutdown if this appropriations bill includes the $10 billion proposed budget for ICE this year. Now let's go into the political article that goes into a little bit more detail of the actual risk pending shutdown itself. This is Politico. This article was published a little bit earlier today, January 24th, 2026 at about 7:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The author is Jordan Carney. Politico.com. The name of this article is titled "Shutdown Risk Grows as Democrats Revolt After Minneapolis Shooting." I'm not going to read the entire article, just a couple of key points here. Congress is on a path toward a partial government shutdown next week after Senate Democrats vow to oppose Department of Homeland Security funding following the killing of a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident by federal agents on Saturday. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement Saturday night that Democrats would not help advance the $6 spending package set for consideration next week, as long as it includes DHS funding. Republicans will need Democrat support in order to clear a 60-vote hurdle to advance the funding bill. Senate Democrats will not provide the votes to proceed to the appropriations bill if the DHS funding bill is included, which is Department of Homeland Security, Schumer said, adding that he would personally vote no. So we get the point here. This is the entire article. Once again, this is off of Politico.com. It came out a little earlier today. I'll now go to a New York Times article that came out a little earlier today as well. Right after this was made, this was January 24th. Does not give me the time that it was published, but it basically is titled, and this is off of NewYorkTimes.com, Democrats vow not to fund ICE after shooting, imperiling spending deal. Key Senate Democrats said they would oppose legislation needed to avoid a government shutdown at the end of the week after federal agents shot and killed a Minneapolis resident. Bipartisan legislation to fund a broad swath of government and avert a shutdown at the end of the week appeared to be in grave danger on Saturday as key Senate Democrats vowed to oppose it after federal agents shot and killed a Minneapolis resident. The rapidly escalating opposition to the measure, which includes $64.4 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, including $10 billion for ICE, amplified the likelihood of a partial government shutdown at the end of the month. This legislation requires the support of Democrats to muster the 60 votes needed to avoid a filibuster and advance in the Senate. I'll stop there. Yeah, that's pretty much, we can stop there. So with that being said, let's go into Matthew 12:26. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We are seeing the same politicians who had no problem with the Department of Homeland Security being installed into this federal government after 9/11. They had no problem with it when Obama was using it to deport more illegal aliens than any other president in history. Trump uses it, and what they're doing is they're basically putting up as much resistance as possible. These are staged protests that are happening out there to cause as much confusion and chaos as possible, to put out this illusion that look at how violent, look at how disorganized and chaotic things are under Trump. ICE can't even do their job correctly because everything is just so chaotic. Look at all of the chaos that they're causing. Meanwhile, you're the ones who's sitting there and basically organizing these protests. You're doing it to be, this is all staged. You basically, this is basically being done in order to shut down the government again. All this is going to eventually lead into we're going to head straight into a session of martial law. And then, of course, we're going to be in that, hurtling into a cashless society and ultimately into the RFID micro CHIP. But you got to have mass chaos here. In order for this to happen, they have to find a way to say that, look, we have the solution for this. Hey, look, we have the way to fix this. This is order out of chaos. So you have to sit up here and cause these particular type of, these disruptions as ICE is trying to do the job that the president has told them to do, round up as many criminal illegal aliens as possible, And so what you do is you catch people out there and you start, organizing these mass protests and put up, and you're putting up a lot of resistance, and now people are getting killed. In order to restore order, you have to do this. This has to be done. So we can see where this is spiraling, and why it's getting out of control. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? Nothing that you see is, this whole thing is staged, but it's all pre-planned. This is exactly how, this government operates. But understand, ultimately, this is the Most High Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. This is his stage play right here. This is everything that he's the director, he's the producer, he's the writer of this entire thing here. So what we see happening is ultimately the will of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. These are the players, these are the characters involved, So another way that we know that this whole thing is staged, let's go back to what the original tweet said. Wrong one. So the original tweet that I read says, odds of a U.S. government shutdown by January 31st spiked to 85% on Polymarket. So, Polymarket. And this is what this is. This is Polymarket.com. Will there be another U.S. government shutdown by January 31st? At the time when I first pulled up this article, it did say 75%. I just refreshed the page, went up to 76. Now it's back down to 75% again. Polymarket is basically a website where people bet on world events, world stuff that's happening in current events. Polymarket is the world's largest decentralized information and prediction market platform where users trade shares using cryptocurrencies on the outcome of real-world events operating on the Polygon blockchain. It allows for speculation on politics, economics, sports, and culture, with share prices ranging from $0 to $1, reflecting the market's perceived probability of an event. So it just lets you know that this whole thing is staged. I mean, when they got betting lines, they got like an actual odds, of will there be a government shutdown by this date? You can buy it for 76 cents, or you can say no for 25 cents, so, and that's basically how it works is pick a Polymarket, buy yes or no shares, depending on your prediction. Next, fund your account with crypto, credit, debit card, or bank transfer. Then you're ready to bet. No bet limits and no fees. Profit, sell your yes or no shares at any time, or wait until the market ends to redeem winning shares for each. So this whole thing is funded, is orchestrated. They got an entire Vegas betting line on these type of things here. So no matter what this devil does, though, it's all in the scriptures. The Most High Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. This is his stage play, like I said a little bit earlier. So we can take a look here at Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposition thereof is of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So, they can bet on these type of things as to whether or not there's going to be a government shutdown, or, they can, no matter what they do, at the end of the day here, it's all being orchestrated. It's all being controlled by the Most High. And once we understand that, it gives us some clarity. It gives us that stability that we need, because we know that it's the Most High Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai who's in control of this whole thing. We understand his prophecies, and we're stable at this point in time. We can see everything that's happening. We understand why it's happening. Ultimately, this is to bring in a more righteous government, a more righteous kingdom and rulership. This particular country here, this whole government, this is wicked, this is corrupt, unrighteous, So, and it's coming up on its 250th, whatever you want to call it, its anniversary or its birthday, but it's time for this place to go. And that's just the bottom line. It's funny watching Edomites talk about black fatigue and all this other bullshit they complain about. But I got Babylon fatigue, and Esau Edom is the primary reason of it. You understand? So, we all got Babylon fatigue over here. So it's like, democracy is played out. America is played out. Capitalism is played out. This whole government is played the fuck out. There's no making this shit great again. And this shit never was great. So this place has to fall, and it's just that simple. So with that being said, I'll end this here with Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7. Like I said, we know a more righteous kingdom is at hand. Verse 6, for a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. The passionate commitment of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai of heaven's armies will make this happen. I pray this has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.